Alright, we will pick up with trench warfare. There we go. So with all of these defensive weapons we have being invented at this time, such as machine guns, we need a defensive strategy of fighting. And this new defensive strategy is going to evolve known as trench warfare. Essentially, trenches were constructed by both sides of the fighting as a long system of ditches where soldiers could hide underneath or inside of, like under the ground, and be able to set up their weapons and machinery in case there and stay there, but be able to like shoot at their enemy if their enemy were to attack them above the ground. Okay? By the end of the war, trenches that were constructed crossed through France and were hundreds of miles long. So you could walk hundreds of miles through France, like completely underground, through these trenches. Again, one for the Allies side, one for the Central Powers side. And you essentially, it was kind of a waiting game. You sat in your trench, looking towards your enemy's trench, waiting for them to come out so you could attack. Fire at them from the safety of your trench. Okay? It was a very dangerous kind of fighting. Most of the fighting happened at night, where you're hoping your enemy can't see you coming. It's you can imagine it's very dangerous to brave yourself to come out of the trench. The land in between the two sides' trenches was known as no man's land, and this was a very dangerous location. Conditions in the trenches were really poor. Honestly, it rained a lot in France, and it was also very cold. So it was cold and damp, and there were rodents, and disease and illness traveled quickly, and you were living in these trenches, like for months at a time. A particularly gross illness known as trench foot develops, and this is what happens when your feet were exposed to the damp, unsanitary conditions and freezing conditions for long periods of time. One other thing I wanted to add about the trenches, they could be anywhere from like yards apart, like enemy to enemy, or miles apart from each other. Alright, we're going to move on to the two-front war. World War I is said to be a two-front war, meaning there was fighting happening in two different major locations. And these two locations were Western Europe and Eastern Europe. So there's the Western Front and the Eastern Front. And we're going to mainly be focused on the Western Front in this class, because when the U.S. does get involved, that's where we're going to fight, and that's where most of the fighting takes place anyway, like in France and Belgium and England and Germany. Okay, so it's mostly Western Europe, Western Europe. Okay. The Schlieffen Plan, and I'm saying it how it should be said, Schlieffen, so you should know that's a German name. Schlieffen was the German Army Chief of Staff, and he developed a plan to attack France early on in the war. A plan that he egotistically named after himself. What the Schlieffen Plan included was Germany using like 90% of their military to swiftly and quickly attack France by coming through Belgium. Now, if you see the map on the PowerPoint, part of France actually touches Germany, but the French might suspect the Germans would come that way. They would be less likely to suspect them coming through a separate country. Belgium sits between part of France, like northern France and Germany. So the plan was cut through Belgium really quickly and surprise them from the north, like attacking the capital, Paris, and other cities. But this plan didn't really work that well because Germany underestimated the strength of the Belgian army. The Belgians were able to kind of hold off the Germans as they cut through. And so France had time to prepare for the impending attack. Now I want to talk about a couple battles. The Battle of Verdun, we'll talk about. It's the longest battle of World War I, lasting from February to December of 1916. That's, a 10, 11-month battle. It's a long-fought battle for a single battle. We fought the Spanish-American War in less time than that. Germany is fighting a war of attrition, meaning they're just trying to wear out their enemy until they would surrender. That's why it takes so long. Verdun is a city in France. It was a fortress city, meaning it's, well fortified with walls and things like that. But it was a key city, an important city to France. And so the Germans say, if we can take this city, it would really hurt French pride. So they attacked Verdun day after day for months. Now the French were able to hold back the Germans and not allow them to take the city, and eventually Germany gives up. Over 800,000 people died, though, in this battle. And no one really gained land or territory, so nothing was really achieved from it, except that the French were able to defend themselves. The next big battle we'll learn about is the Battle of the Somme. The British planned to attack the Somme, which is a river in France. They had planned to attack the Germans who were located there. It actually happens during the middle of the Battle of Verdun. It's the British trying to help the French kind of take some German pressure off of them. But it ends up being a huge disaster. The British bombard Germany for weeks. But they don't really get a lot of land. And they lost a huge number of their soldiers. They actually lose 1/3 of the soldiers they had in this battle on the first day, which is a military record, actually. And by the end of the battle, there's over, 600,000 casualties for the Allied side, over 500,000 casualties for the German side, and the Allies only really gained like 7 miles of total land, so it just wasn't very successful in achieving anything. Okay, I want to just talk really quickly with the war at sea. I want to talk about a couple of strategies before, and then we'll stop because I want to get to what brings us into the war later tomorrow. British blockades. The British were pretty successful at blockading Germany with their navy, cutting off German trade. They basically patrolled the whole coast of Germany, the northern coast with the water. We talked about U-boats briefly already. I want you to know that Germans German subs or U-boats were all over the Atlantic preying on any ship that it would find. And that includes a non-wartime ship. They would attack ships that were just trading goods or carrying civilians in some cases. And this is known as unrestricted submarine warfare. Now, just keep this in mind for the next thing we'll talk about tomorrow. Maritime law at this time, maritime law means like law of the water, like law of the ocean. This is the law when your boat's out at sea. When you had a boat out at sea, you were supposed to fly your country's flag. You were supposed to warn a non-military ship before sinking it. You were supposed to warn it that if they did not turn around or go away from enemy territory, that they would be shot or attacked. You were supposed to send out an SOS to pick up any survivors. And passenger liners weren't supposed to be carrying weapons. Okay? And those 4 things are on the slides. You can pause them and type them down if you want. But those are 4 things, and that's going to kind of come to a head when we talk about the Lusitania tomorrow in class. So write down any questions you have, and I will see you tomorrow.